Hello and welcome to episode 18 of On the Hook, the official Yellow Pike Media podcast. My name is Rick. I'll be your host as always. And this week we're talking about AI. We have a really great guest. His name is Nick. He is from a company that is doing very interesting things, in my opinion, with AI, not your standard chatbot type of things, utilizing AI in a far more interesting and in-depth way. Nick, welcome. Tell us all about you and about Direqt.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. As you mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Direqt, which is a conversational AI platform purpose-built for content creators, digital media companies, content publishers. In a nutshell, we help the world's biggest media brands take their content, train an AI on that content, and then distribute that wherever they have an audience. So that could be integrating an assistant or a chatbot onto their website that's meant to drive engagement with content, not do customer service, or even off platform, you can distribute these things in social media channels and text messaging apps, and then ultimately monetize that audience through advertising. And so in a nutshell, build, grow, and monetize your own AI to help you unlock deeper engagement with your fans and your audience and drive new revenue.
How did you get here? How did Direqt come about? Where did you start? And at what point did you say, there's a very cool thing happening right now in this industry, but we can do better?
Yeah, the credit there goes to my partners. So two of my co-founders in particular, John Duffy is our CEO and Mick Willis, our CTO. John had noticed that media companies weren't using chat at all many years ago. Whereas if you think in your own life, you probably have had some form of a chat interaction with a business. It's probably a retailer that's saying, hey, your package is on the way, or maybe you're trying to process a refund. Maybe it's your airline, you're trying to change a ticket, your internet provider, your service is down, you need help. So every business in the world at some level was using messaging or chat. And this is pre-chat GPT, pre-having great AI. But media companies weren't. So there was kind of an obvious white space there that was informed from actual conversations with leading media companies. And then Mick's background on the technology side, I think, really allowed him to kind of see that, well, natural language processing is going to get a lot better and AI is going to get a lot stronger. And as that happens, the ability to actually have a really engaging conversation with content is going to evolve. And that really just informed this hypothesis that as AI got better and better, the primary way, or one of the primary ways that people would discover, consume, and engage with content at scale would be through natural language, through conversational interfaces, what we think of today as maybe a chatbot or an assistant. And if you look at what's happened with ChatGPT, what Google is doing with AI overviews, what Meta is doing with Meta AI, today that sort of hypothesis or belief, I think, is relatively well understood and at least acknowledged, whereas in the early days, it might have been a little contrarian. Fortunately, it did break our way. And so underneath that, we saw that no different than going from desktop to mobile, right? There's going to be this huge shift where the people who create content will need new tools. And that's across sort of the entire spectrum of like, how do I create the experience? How do I grow it and distribute it? And then how do I monetize it with advertising?
All of this started coming about, if my research is correct, and I'm known for faulty research, so I apologize if I get this wrong. This all started coming about around 2017-ish, around that area, in that time.
That's exactly right.
Which is interesting to me because I feel like around that same time, media companies were kind of reticent to have bots on their site or engaging in any way. Because really back then, like you said, we didn't have Chat GPT. We had something that was barely better than like the old Alice bots from the 90s, which you could trip up in like 3 questions, right?
100%.
So it's interesting. You guys, like you said, you saw a white space and you moved in there. What was the initial reception?
Well, one thing that was happening at the time, probably 2 years before the inception of Direqt, there was a small wave of hype around chat as a medium or as an interface, including with content. So when Facebook launched Messenger, they had this huge push to try to get brands to create chatbots that people could have conversations with through Messenger, on Facebook. And at the time, I forget all of them, but TechCrunch and CNN and the Wall Street Journal and dozens of media companies had attempted to build things. And that sort of lasted 6-12 months maybe, and eventually sort of dissipated for a variety of reasons. We were, let's say, 2 years post that. And so we kind of looked at that typical hype cycle and we're like, yeah, that was sort of the peak. We're in the trough of disillusionment. All of a sudden things are going to start coming back up. And really, if you looked at those experiences, like the underlying technology that was available was really limited. and you couldn't do anything that was that different or that engaging. And to your point, across the spectrum for any type of business, the types of conversations you had were really, really limited. And that's because you kind of have to build these like if this, then that types of experiences. And so for us, you can imagine the early days, the conversations with the C-suite or senior execs at big major media brands was very different than what it is today in a post-Chat GPT world, right? It was, it would be like trying to sell somebody on a mobile app before the iPhone came out in a way. Like it certainly was an uphill battle. I think, were thoughtful about packaging the opportunity in a way that made sense to them and creating value propositions that were de-risked and resonated with specific groups inside of the organization. And I think that's just part of the startup journey. Certainly over the last 2 years, it's been much easier and much more fun because it's not an education. Right. We don't have to evangelize this idea that chat is going to become a big thing. I think everybody's aware of it. There's a lot of fear, rightfully so, in the system about, wow, if people only talk to ChatGPT or Perplexity or use AI overviews, whatever it might be, we might lose traffic. People might prefer that instead of reading long form content. What do we do about it? And so I think the problem set, the consideration set is night and day. But in the early days, there was a lot of education and not even evangelism as much as it is just explaining, like, here's what this is, here's how it works, here's why it matters, here's where we think the world is going. And we were fortunate that, several of the most meaningful media companies in the world were willing to take a leap on that. And I think in hindsight, hopefully they've looked, smart in the rearview mirror that they saw this coming ahead of when most of the world did.
Certainly. Sure. I mean, I'm sure there were a lot of CEOs in the early days that were so disillusioned because, as someone who remembers those early attempts prior to, what we now see as AI chatbots, there was an awful lot of, I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question?
Mm-hmm.
Because training people to use a bot, you can't do it in a mass appeal kind of way where you learn how to ask the right question the right way for these kind of dumb bots we used to have. But now with AI, you have greater flexibility with natural language. And they respond in more natural language. So it feels more like a conversation. The engagement question is interesting to me because I hadn't thought about that. Normally when I'm talking to someone about AI and they say there is a fear, everybody's brain immediately jumps to our Terminator future where the AI just takes us all out. It's a very different conversation to think about from a content creation standpoint. How are these bots taking away from the experience we're trying to craft? So what is it that makes your tech different, that makes it more engaging and brings true value to these organizations that are using it?
Yeah, there's a few things I'd probably highlight on that. One is everything we do is about elevating the human created content. So we work with major content publishers, newspapers, magazines, digital media brands that have massive, groups of people. They're journalists, they're reporters, they're writers, they're analysts that are, really day to day spending all of their time trying to create great, interesting, compelling content. And they're doing that the way they've always done that. It's a very human-led and human-oriented process. Maybe some of them are using AI to find efficiencies day to day with research, maybe to brainstorm potential headlines. But these are companies where there's real people writing real stories about real things that matter. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we make that content easier for their audience to find. We help unearth insights and interests of their audience so they can inform what the actual editorial team will decide to write about. We help users go down rabbit holes with their content, no different than you might on YouTube. So if somebody comes to your website and they're reading your content, you can keep them there for longer. And what we've shown is that people who engage with our chat, our AI conversations, actually consume more content than those who don't. And so everything we do is about trying to elevate the human creation that's already existing today. We are not a tool that like automates writing stories or blog posts or anything like that. It is much more of a chat GPT that is completely trained and unique to your publisher's content. So one of the other things that brings to the table for the user is trust. Because if I go to one of the mainstream chatbots today, whether that's Gemini or Meta AI or Claude or ChatGPT, because they're trained on, in general, like the entire internet, the open web, tons of different sources, and that could include Reddit, that could include, random blogs where you don't really know if you can trust the writer. It could include fake news, all these different things that may or may not be happening at any given point in the conversation, but could. It makes it harder to know if the answers you're getting are reliable. Whereas if you're talking to, in theory, like the New York Times, their chatbot only knows about the stories the New York Times has published. And so for the same reason, when there's breaking news and you're not sure if it's true yet or what to believe, you're going to look for someone you trust. That could be a reporter at an institution. It could be the institution itself. Our chatbots are completely contained within any given publisher's universe. That allows them to have their own unique experience. It's built on their own unique voice and unique perspectives. It allows the audience to trust the information because they know what the chatbot is telling them isn't coming from some random place on the internet. It's coming from the publisher that they've already decided they trust.
So your bots only focus on that original content, on the trusted sources. They're not pulling additional reference from Joe 3618 on Reddit, who may not have the greatest insight into the topic.
With all due respect to Joe 3618, that's correct. We don't use his content. We are a platform to empower the publisher. So they give us the content that they want their chatbot to know about. We call that its knowledge base, effectively its brain. And that is whatever content that they have in their archive. Some publishers have content that goes back to the 1800s. And it's fully within their control. And the more content, the more interesting and engaging and smarter the AI will be. But it's only the content that they have the rights to use, which is the content that they've produced. So no, we do not pull in Reddit answers into the user experiences that we power.
Or other news outlets or any kind of other content. It's purely based on the resources, research, and knowledge contained within the site that the bot is responsible for.
That's exactly right.
I like that because it does, I feel like it gives the user a little bit better sense of authoritative responses that they're receiving, because it, like you said, it's a trusted source, it's a trusted individual. Therefore, the level of trust in whatever the bot is returning will equally be as high, and for valid reason, because it's all contained in the same source material.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier some of the limitations back in the day with conversational experiences more broadly was, they would always hit you with this fallback message of like, I can't do this, try this, right?
Right.
And one of the things that we try to do is take a proactive approach to educate and onboard our publishers, readers, to understand this isn't ChatGPT. This is completely specific to the content that you're already here to consume. And if they try to go off the rails, if I ask a sports publisher about an international conflict going on in a different part of the world, sports publisher is going to be like, I'm here to talk about sports. Did you see what LeBron did last night? Do you think Bronny's going to be good? Right. Was it nepotism? Should he get a starting role? Is JJ Redick the right? It's going to bring the conversation back to what it actually can talk about, to help the user understand that this isn't here to help you do your homework or write a poem, right? That's not where we think publishers want to compete or should compete. That's not the business they're in, right? They're in the business of creating unique content that's uniquely valuable. We view our role as an accelerant or a catalyst for that.
Let's talk, just us. Tell me about the Microsoft partnership.
So Microsoft was the first company to publicly announce a dedicated product to monetize chatbots. So if you think about how, again, you go from like the web to mobile, there was new ad tech that was built to make advertising work well natively inside of a mobile experience. Conversations demand the same thing, and probably at a higher level, because it's a very dynamic conversation. It's a very different form factor. There's a whole lot of nuances and intricacies to that. And Microsoft started working on a product to help people who power chatbots monetize those chatbots with ads. And so for Direqt, as a platform for publishers, primarily ad-supported businesses, right? Their business model is primarily produce content, attract an audience, show them ads while they consume the content, and that's how they monetize. Again, you can sell subscriptions and run events. There's a couple other things, but advertising is the core. And so one of the things that's always been a pillar of what we were building from a platform perspective was monetization in chat. And so Microsoft was our first marquee partner on that front. And what it allows us to do is when a user is having a conversation with one of our publishers' bots, we can show that user an ad that's relevant to them based on what they're chatting about. And then we share the revenue with the publisher. And this is really important if you buy into this hypothesis that as time goes on, people will spend more and more time interacting with AI online. Well, for publishers to produce content, they need to make sure they can monetize that content in an AI-first internet. And advertising is the way free content has been monetized for decades and decades and decades. And so that's always been something we've known we had to do. Microsoft gives us an incredible partnership because they have access to, and I don't know these numbers exactly, 150,000, 200,000 advertisers already that buy ads for
Sure.
Bing and MSN and across their networks and even Xbox, right? They just have a huge business. I think Microsoft was the exclusive advertising partner for Netflix when they introduced ads, right? They're really good at these things. And so it's a great value add for our publishers. And then from the user's perspective, you can imagine you might go to a fashion publisher, right? A fashion magazine, a fashion outlet, and maybe you're asking about the Met Gala, and you want to know, what did Kim Kardashian wear to the Met Gala last night? Who's the designer? And then you say, that's really cool. I can't afford that. Where can I get some dupes? Well, you basically just performed a search query, right? That's what you would have done on Google. It's what you might have done in a different search engine. You're already having a conversation with a brand that you care about, and you have commercial intent. You're actually asking, like, hey, can you recommend a dress for me that looks like that? We turn that into a monetizable event because we can actually pull in an advertisement from a brand that makes a dress that looks like the one they're asking about at a lower price point and show it to them. And if they click on that, no different than if they clicked on a search ad, Direqt will get revenue and we'll share that revenue with the publisher. So it's win-win across the board. And so we're really thrilled with that. I think we announced that partnership a couple months ago. We're starting to roll that out slowly. We'll be delicate with the way we introduce it to users because it's a new medium and you got to be thoughtful about the right ways to do advertising. I think, there's two extremes. If you get ads on Instagram, like a lot of people tell you they're really good. I would. They're very relevant to me. They're not intrusive. They're delivered in a thoughtful way. Even as ad load has increased over the years, the experience on Instagram is still quite positive. I think there's other parts of the internet where it's not so great. And so we're trying to be closer to the former than the latter. And it's the first of many things to come from us on the advertising front.
It's interesting you mentioned Instagram because I'm sitting here thinking of Meta in general, and how Facebook and Instagram and that kind of ecosystem present ads and how they've become really almost scarily proficient at targeting an audience. I saw an ad the other day that literally was targeted towards a hobby and my demographic to the point where it appeared in the text of the ad. Are you more targeted than that? Because sometimes it does feel kind of general, but do you have kind of that level of specificity for your audience where you can make it, this I know is your hobby and you've recently asked questions about it, so maybe you should go buy a new camera lens, right? And here's a discount coupon or something. Is it that kind of granularity, or is it still kind of a little more fuzzy?
It really could depend. I think in the early days, the right analogy is search, because what we're really doing today is capturing explicit user intent where they're literally asking for something and then showing them exactly what they're asking for. So I would argue that in order, the most relevant ads that you can see online are 1, search ads, 2, social ads, 3, we'll just call that other, everything else. And the reason that search is number 1 is it's really hard to beat the user literally asking you for a specific thing and then showing it to them. Certainly. So that's where we are today. Now you could imagine as we evolve, and I know that this AI had a conversation with Rick, and that conversation might have been yesterday or an hour ago or even 7 messages ago. And Rick has asked me to remember what he's interested in and to personalize the experience for him. And we might learn that he lives in this state and he's interested in these things and he's asked questions with this specific tone. And so maybe not only do we want to show him an ad based on those things, similar to how what you see on Meta might work based on the description you provided, but also we might want to copyright the ad in the same slang that Rick types his messages in, right? Maybe we want to use the same shorthand that he uses so it feels more natural, like a recommendation. I think that's the direction things are going. And again, there's going to be a balancing act on the right timing and the right ways to deliver that for the end user. From an advertiser perspective, like in general, certainly a buyer, that relevance drives performance. And I think you can do a much better job with relevance. And then all these platforms are also building up their own like generative advertising capabilities where the image, the picture, the video that is shown might be created on the fly based on who the audience is. And that's not something we're spending much time on today. I think it's relatively nascent, but all the big platforms are working on it. I think that could get really interesting for us as well. And the last thing on this that we think a lot about that seems really likely is this like chat to chat handoff, where if I'm asking, ESPN about LeBron's fitness routine, and then I ask how I can, mimic that, maybe they recommend the Nike fitness chatbot to me. And instead of clicking on an ad that takes me to a landing page, maybe when I click on an ad, I start having a conversation with the advertiser. So now I'm interacting directly with Nike, and they can convert me in that conversation with an offer that's personalized based on what I tell them. And so I think that as an ecosystem is quite likely to develop over time. And I think that'll run across the web and app and social and everywhere people spend time.
It's interesting because what I'm kind of hearing in my head as you describe this future of bots connecting you to bots, it almost feels that there's a little bit of a sense of being impersonal, that you're just moving from bot to bot to bot to be served a different form of advertising. But there's also a thought that it's an interesting way to move people closer to their own likes and interests at a kind of commercial yet also somewhat social level, because I'm sure at that point, and we all do it, even if our conversations with people in our lives are about complaining about the ads that we get served. I feel like it sparks other social conversations in that same kind of spirit, both pro and con. And I can see, I have a friend who's very much into fitness and health, and she's just it's like it's her identity, right? I can see her having that experience and becoming a proponent and advocate for that type of interaction with Nike, the one you just described.
Mark Zuckerberg has a quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but something to the effect of like, people don't hate ads, people hate ads that suck. And I think that's like pretty true.
I think Super Bowl proves that, right?
Exactly. The ads during the Super Bowl are content. They're entertainment.
Sure.
Right. That is arguably as big as the show. And I would say it probably isn't, but there's so many people that tune in just for that. And the people who tune in for the game absolutely love the commercials. It's like you're at your Super Bowl party. You don't want to run to the bathroom because you don't want to miss them. That's advertising at its best. And I think, again, directionally, that's what we aspire to. I think that's what most people in the space hopefully do. I couldn't lay claim to the motivations from others, but that's what we want to get to. And I think, to your point, like, the devil's in the details. There's a way to put ads on Instagram that would have been terrible. The thing that makes them good is the creative and the format and the relevance and the targeting and the timing and the ad load and all these little things that add up into a delightful user experience. And there's a way to do that with these conversation-based monetizations as well. And one way to think of that is, it's word of mouth. If you build trust with an AI, you like talking to this AI every day to learn about what's going on in the world, to understand things you care about more deeply. Maybe you use it to win debates with your friends about which team or player is better. Maybe it's helping you build your fantasy team or place bets for the weekend because you have access to better data more easily. Well, you might want that to recommend what you're actually going to be interested in and why. And if it hands it off to you in a seamless way, right, I think that can be a really great experience because it has the opportunity to be much more personalized and much more relevant than simply sending somebody to a static landing page, right? Like, the ability to give direct feedback to a brand, a content creator, an advertiser is a net positive for the user. And if they don't want it to be, they don't have to do that, right? Nobody forces you to send a message in. But what we see is people are really their authentic selves a lot more when they're communicating in private. Now, in general, you're probably not communicating with brands too much. But if you look at the behavior patterns on social, as an example, teenagers now spend more time in the DMs than they spend in the newsfeed or with stories, right? So that's a massive shift. And if you go look at how content is engaged with on social, what you'll see is that more people are sharing the posts to their friends via DMs than commenting. So back in the day, like, I used to comment and tag my friends. Like, that used to be the way that you shared content and engaged with it.
And now, you had a long discussion thread that the world could follow along.
100%. And now what happens most of the time is I DM it to my 3 buddies and we start talking about it privately. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. But one of the big ones is when you're in a private setting, you can express yourself way more authentically. You can be yourself. You can share your opinions. You're not worried about what people are thinking. And we see that even with our AIs that we power, people really share how they're feeling and what they're thinking about with the AI. And we don't think it's because it's an AI. We think it's because people are passionate about the content. They want a way to sort of express themselves and what they feel. And they might not have a great way to do that with these big companies that are producing the content that they consume so passionately. And chat serves in many ways as a way to unlock a lot of engagement with audiences because you're giving them a forum to actually weigh in.
Sure, certainly. I mean, I can think about times where I'm guilty of doing this, but I'm also guilty of seeing people who do this and kind of mentally judging them when they'll go on Twitter and say, "Hey, company X, you did this thing and it really stinks, and I'm mad at you and I'm angry. What are you going to do about it?" I feel like that conversation, to your point, changes dramatically if it's a private conversation with a bot that, is going to actually try and help you instead of exposing yourself to people who read it and go, "Really, dude, that's your problem today?" It's like,
Yeah,
why does the world need to know about this? And I think this is an interesting solution to that, personal stressor on the part of the poster.
Yeah, I don't know because we don't do customer service
Mhm.
as part of our focus, right? Because our customers don't really have customer service. They don't, generally speaking, sell products that need to be serviced. They're producing content. It's free. Some of them don't have customer service teams to begin with, so we don't get a lot of that. But I do wonder for the brands that get yelled at on Twitter because the food was bad or the flight was late or the hotel room wasn't available that they had booked, which seem like reasonable things to be pretty upset by.
Mhm.
I would imagine orders of magnitude more people do express that privately than on Twitter. And it's the 1 out of 1,000 that's willing to
Sure.
go on Twitter and yell and scream about it. And to be fair, they probably have a higher likelihood of getting some type of outsized refund or credit or whatever they're after by making a big scene about it publicly. But I think less people are inclined to do that because there's a social tax you pay. Your friends are like,
Certainly.
"Are you all right, man? Like you're screaming about $7 at Wendy's on Twitter. Like were you bored? Do you need $7?" And I'm being cheeky with that, but I think
Let
most
me
people don't
Venmo
want to
you
do that.
$7 if you'll just
And
take that
again,
post
yeah, and
down. Yeah.
certainly it's not about the 7, but most people don't want to express themselves publicly. I think less than 3% of active users on Twitter actually post tweets. And I don't know what the data is since Elon took it over and turned that into X, but at least several years ago, I believe that to be the proof point, at least in the US.
Really?
And so you think about it and you're like, right, most people consume, but they're not
Right.
actively creating and contributing to the content. I think it's one of the things that you think of TikTok that they've gotten so right is they've made it so much easier to create content. They've unlocked a new sort of wave of creativity and a new category of creators. And I think having access to more content makes it easier to recommend great content. And I think everyone's trying to do that. But I know in my own life, like I don't post publicly on social too much. Definitely not nearly to the level that I engage privately. And I think for
Right.
brands, whether it's
Okay.
our content publishers or any brand, creating forums for users to communicate with you privately makes a lot of sense because you get better insights. You learn what they really care about, and then you can
Sure.
service them better.
And yeah, and you can more accurately tailor and focus the content you're creating to the audience that, is engaging with you and thus
Yeah.
it more frequently. Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know the 3% number. That's an interesting number to me.
I mean,
But it
someone
does
should
make
fact check
sense.
me on that. Like it's been a
Sure.
couple of years, but I believe that's still the number.
We'll get Jared on it and he'll come up with that it's really 3.8% and you're terribly wrong. But
If I'm
it,
within
it
1%, I'd be pretty
it
happy on that.
right. It is interesting to me because recently I did have a conversation very much like that with a friend about I'm not a content creator.
Hmm.
But in reality, if you're posting on social, you kind of are. You may not think of it, but you are curating content for your circle one way
Yeah,
or another.
whether you view yourself as one or not, I think the term it has a quasi professional lens to it.
Right.
I think people think of content creators as, I'm intentionally producing this content to build some outcome, revenue, a business,
Sure.
awareness that gets me something else, a book deal, whatever it is. But from the platform's perspective, like if you're producing content, you are creating content that gets put into the ether that could drive engagement and time in app that then can get monetized. And
Right.
so, yeah, I think if you're posting publicly, you're a creator in some sense. And certainly there's way more people than ever before that think of themselves as creators. And it's been said for years now. I don't know the latest on this, but it feels like it's been 5, 6, 7 years where every year the story that runs when they survey high school students is number one job of high school students is YouTuber or influencer or creator, right? You could substitute which one they pick or what flavor of the month. But the thing young people want to is be a creator. It's the new celebrity, right? It's the new, I want to be on The Real World or on The Bachelorette. Like, I want to be a creator. I
Right.
want to be in movies. I want to make music. I want to be an athlete. Today, that's I want to have an audience that watches me on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. And that's because you get fame. It's because you get notoriety. It's because there's a lore of economics where you can make real money as a creator. And it's because there's a lot of people who are creative. And I think as the types of content that people consume has become fragmented, it's also easier for people to envision themselves being a creator, right? Like unboxing videos are massive on YouTube. I don't think anybody would have seen that 20 years ago and thought like, I'm going to be a creator because I'm going to.
Why is this interesting? Right.
Right. But somebody does it and you realize people care. And then some set of people go, oh my gosh, I could do that. And I think that just continues to compound and compound.
I would agree with that. Yeah, definitely. I think people shy away from the word because there are stigmas attached, or, oh no, the creators are just really into themselves. But to refocus a little bit, I kind of stalked your LinkedIn a little bit last week. And you had some interesting thoughts about working with different brands with Direqt. And the one that stuck out to me, if we can talk about this and go a little deep into it, was Spotify. I am a Spotify subscriber. I love their AI DJ. It's terrifying how accurate it can be sometimes. Direqt and Spotify, what does that look like in your grand scheme of things?
So let me first clarify. I think the post you're referring to is a concept I put out of what Spotify should do with AI. I want to be clear. We do not power that experience for Spotify today. So Spotify, as you mentioned, has an AI DJ that I think is an incredible experience. I know a lot of people on our team at Direqt really like it. I actually had the chance. So X, who's the voice of it, actually spoke at a conference Axios hosted here about AI in New York. It was really cool to see. And it's really funny. You hear the voice and you're like, you're the DJ, and it's a real human behind it. The thing that from my firsthand experience with AI DJ that was missing was the ability to give more feedback to it, to have a back and forth conversation. And I think the example I called out was I'd say a pretty wide range of taste in music. I like everything except for country, although some of this new like rap country fusion stuff I kind of like. What I would like to do is, as a user, is just train my own algorithm. I want to be able to chat with Spotify and say, hey, I want to listen to songs that are rap songs from 2005 or later, but sample songs from the 60s or the 50s, right? I love Nina Simone. I really like, but I need a beat. I'm going to work out. I know there's a bunch of rap songs that sample music from the 50s and 60s. Specifically, I really want to listen to things that have sampled Nina Simone. She's probably one of the most sampled artists from that time. That's a really hard thing to create. And what would be amazing as a user is when I get that, if I can then go, okay, this is great, but now filter it to songs where the beats per minute is above 90 and make me a separate playlist with all the reference samples that were in there so I can go find the stuff I didn't even know was a sample. And you can just continue down this journey of like hyper personalization where the data that Spotify gets on me as a listener isn't just how many songs that I listen to in which genre for how long, but me explicitly telling them why I was listening to it, what I was looking for, what I would have rather preferred. And that can be everything from like, hey, I want this type of rap music at the gym. I want this type of rap music in the car. And it's not that they don't make an attempt to do these things today. You can go find playlists that are curated by different moods and themes and situations. But music is a really personal experience for most people. So there's random songs that nobody's ever heard of that mean a lot to me because I heard it on a YouTube video when I was 12, and then I ripped it off of LimeWire, and then it's still on my iPhone with some like awful audio quality. But there's some connection to it from some moment in my life, and I want to make sure that's in my playlist. I would like the ability to say, hey, not just that I heart this song, that I hit the heart button to say I like it or that I love it. I want to say, this is like level 1,000. Like, this is my like top 5 all time. I want you to know that kind of a thing. And then the AI DJ, the playlists, the recommendations, everything across that experience would just be so much more relevant to me. And that would drive consumption. I would find myself listening to more music if I knew it when I just hit shuffle, play, radio, AI DJ, that I was going to get something more spot on to what like I think I want in my head, right? Because a lot of times you have a very fuzzy idea of what you're looking for. You're like, gosh, I want a certain thing right now. I don't have the words for it. And
I want a mood. I want this vibe, but I can't explain it in the terms of songs that I want to hear.
Yeah, because the only options you get are like upbeat. And then you get a bunch of house music and you're like, I didn't want house music. Or maybe I did, but I didn't want this type of house music. But I'm not a music nerd. Unfortunately, I wish I was. I don't know the subgenre,
Right.
radio station like this to go down. And if I could just ask and just say, can you guys go find me these things? Like, most of that data probably exists inside of somewhere at Spotify. And if it doesn't, it certainly they could tag it and categorize. Like, a lot of that stuff should be available to them, and it would create a much more dynamic experience. I think the same thing for Netflix. I think that they have the same opportunity to do much more advanced recommendations by enabling the user to give explicit feedback. Did I stop watching that show because I didn't like it? Or did I stop watching the show because there was violence and my 7-month-old son, made up, obviously don't have a son, came into the room? Oh, there's a kid in the room. I want him to see violence. I'm going to turn it off. Right. Netflix doesn't know that's why I turned it off. Netflix is like, he turned the show off after 2.5 minutes. He doesn't like these types of shows. If they could send me a text message to be like, hey, not your type, we'll take that stuff out of your algorithm. And I could reply, no, I was actually really into it. Somebody walked in the room that can't see the violence. I'm going to come back to that later. Well, now it's not being filtered. Or like, every time I watch a true crime show and there's a British accent and I like the show, they think I just want British true crime. I like British true crime, but the reason I liked the show wasn't because the guy was British. It's because it was a great mob movie and one actor happened to be British. It would be great to be able to provide explicit signals into these recommendation algorithms that we use every day.
And how do you see Direqt working with like a Netflix in that capacity? Is it generating the questionnaire, and does it pop up on your screen at some point while you're scrolling through menus? What?
Yeah, so we're starting to do this today with our content publishers, primarily on their web properties. So think you go to a website, you're reading an article, you're reading a story. We ask the users questions about what they're reading. Users ask us being the AI, so the publisher's bot that we power. The users ask questions. We engage in a conversation. People send 4, 5, 6, 7 messages about something. And what we do is we take that and we turn it into these editorial insights. And we can go, hey, it turns out that like 32% of the people that were reading this story about Ronaldo, that you might have thought were Ronaldo fans because they're reading about Ronaldo, they actually hate Ronaldo. And we know that because we asked them, hey, are you excited for Ronaldo's next game? And they wrote, no, I effing hate Ronaldo. I'm a Messi fan. I'm looking for if it's a good idea to bet against him to score a goal in his next game, right? And without the explicit feedback, you don't have that signal. So all of this is early days, but we're starting to do that where we're seeing this, right? This was almost reactive. We started looking at, well, what are people saying? And we're like, wow, people share a lot about what they feel. And then when you compare that to the insights that you typically have in any sort of existing product where there's no like explicit feedback where the user is literally telling you what they care about, it's a level of detail that wasn't available. And so we're now sharing that with the content publisher, the creator, and they can use that to inform their editorial strategy. And we envision over time that'll inform the recommendations that we make as a product. Or so our AI will recommend content knowing this guy loves Ronaldo, really doesn't like Messi. Let's make sure we factor that into what stories we might show him next time he comes to the site.
Interesting. And I'm thinking as I'm listening to you, it's like, this makes perfect sense because on a sports fan level, I'm thinking, I like football. I don't watch a ton. And the football I watch is for very specific reasons. So where do I fit in the ESPN ecosystem that way, right? And especially things like when I think about hockey, I'm a hockey fan, but I have a greater love for international hockey than I do the NHL because it's wider ice, so it's a faster game and it's more finesse. And when I talk about the NHL, I tend to talk about West Coast teams more because they play more in that style than East Coast teams, which are, I mean, look, you've got the Broadway Bullies, you've got, the Bash Brothers. If you go back through hockey, East Coast has always been a physical, aggressive game. West Coast has always been this finesse speed game. So I feel like if there were a tool, the way you were just describing, where I could go and say, hey, I'm kind of looking for this kind of sports entertainment in these particular, leagues of this style, I could see myself, using a pay-per-view kind of model where it's like, yeah, I would definitely watch that game because those teams are interesting to me. And I didn't know they played this style.
Yeah.
So I think feel like it opens that up.
100%. And I think for everybody, there's 1 or 3 or 10 versions of that where like you have just your own unique, and that one's so good, right? I like international hockey because of the style, which means I actually am into a couple types of teams or players because they play a similar style. There's no way for the ESPNs of the world to know that, because like the best you could really do is ask somebody to click buttons to say which team is your favorite, and that doesn't tell you the full picture.
Right.
But if you can, one, on your own, go to the chatbot and say, hey, like, I don't actually like the NHL. I like these 3 teams because they play this style. Just show me things about people in this sort of finesse playing style and strategy versus kind of the brute forces, because that's the only thing I'm interested in. It's way better. And then the second level is, can the AI start seeing patterns and be like, hey, Rick, it's really interesting that you only read about international hockey and the Oilers. Are you from Edmonton? And you might be like, no, I'm not from Edmonton. Edmonton plays like the international guys that I like to watch. And now it's like, got it. We know something about Rick we did not know before. And that's really powerful.
I feel like, to take it to a fan service level, I feel like that kind of targeting also then is good for the NHL itself, not just ESPN as its broadcaster, but then granularly, wow, that's a hard one to get out. It's great for the individual teams, because through all of that knowledge and insight, you guys probably figure out that if Anaheim's playing, I'm probably going to figure out when and where and how to watch it or get to a game if I can. So now it's a question of, is Rick a Ducks fan, or is Rick just, that's just something he was interested in then? How do you engage the team that way? How do you engage the NHL that way, in addition to ESPN? And obviously that opens up more advertising opportunities to kind of pull me further into that ecosystem.
I think it opens up a ton on the advertising front, right? You know more about the audience. You can be way more intelligent. I buy into your thinking from the league level too. I mean, you could imagine if you're the sales rep selling tickets, and ticket sales is tough, man. It's cold calling. You're on the phone all day. You're smiling and dialing, trying to get people to spend a lot of money come to a game. It'd be actually great for them to know, okay, he lives in Edmonton for the sake of this scenario. He's actually not an Oilers fan. He likes the style. Let's follow up on our calls much more aggressively when they're playing this team that also plays that way. And it's like a guaranteed barn burner versus I don't want to use my next 3 follow-ups because you might burn the relationship when they're playing the Devils. We know it's a style of play thing with Rick, so we're going to more intelligently prospect him. And all of this from like a first principles level, just I think applies across every line of business. No matter if you're a retailer, if you're in hospitality, if you're in professional services, like it's always better to know your customer more deeply, right? You always want to know people at a more intimate level and then use that to provide a better product, service, and experience. And so, yeah, I definitely see the cross applicability of it.
Yeah, I will actually give you a great example of that to the cold call methodology. Is I went and saw a local AHL hockey team just down the road. Got good seats because AHL is very inexpensive, right?
You're banging on the glass,
right? And I went, and it was great, and I had a lot of fun. And I have just, like, every 3 to 4 weeks, I get it. Don't you want to be a ticket holder? Don't you want to be a season ticket holder? Hey, there's another game this Saturday. Want to come? The piece they missed was I went because it was Star Wars night.
Fascinating.
So that's what we're talking about, right? It's that piece of information that if they knew that, they wouldn't burn the relationship. They'd use it every time they did a theme night.
Yeah, they'd call you on May 4th and give you the May the 4th be with you, and you're like, these guys get me, and they're funny, and maybe 100%.
I love that there is a future for AI that doesn't involve Terminators and John Connor and sending people through time. This to me, and I know there's probably people who are going to listen to this and think that's still really scary because you're just learning so much about me. You have all this personal information. Yeah. And what are you going to do with it?
Reasonable fear. I think it's not by coincidence that most people haven't deleted Instagram and TikTok. So my general perspective is like
the worst data grabbers that we have right now.
Consumers vote with their behavior, right? Like people do what they want to do at the end of the day. And I think like privacy and security and data ownership are really important. I think people understand that much more than they used to, which I think is awesome. I think some regulation has made it easier for people to understand what's happening. And I think that's generally like going in the right direction with good intent. But at the end of the day, most people voting by their behavior would rather trade their data for convenience and personalization and relevance and entertainment and fun and escapism and the things we use the internet for. And it's an interesting balance because like on the surface, hey, do you want these companies to know everything about you? No. Do you want the recommendations to be completely irrelevant and hard to use? No. And it's not that explicit. People don't really think of it through that black and white yes or no lens. But day to day, what most people do is share their information implicitly or explicitly and get a better experience as a byproduct of it. And so I would acknowledge and agree that there's a version of this where you could be like, I kind of wish this AI didn't still know everything about me.
Right.
The good news is the consumer's in control. You don't have to tell ChatGPT your birthday. You don't have to tell Meta's AI, what you're worried about with your girlfriend, right? You can choose to. And I do think you should be eyes wide open about the potential risks there. But if I had to make a bet, I would bet that things get much, much more personalized than less, and probably more quickly than they have in the past, just because it's the tools are better, it's easier. People have been, I think, subconsciously onboarded into this idea that like, I want my algorithm to know me. I don't know about you. I have a lot of friends. I do this myself. I make multiple accounts on certain social platforms so I can curate my feeds a little bit, because you can't really manually sort of control your algorithm. It's nice to create a different account and be like, I'm only going to engage with sports content, because sometimes I want to get the sports news and I don't want to see what's going on in politics. Or sometimes I just need to make sure I'm getting up to date on what's going on in AI and technology and business. And I don't want to be distracted with my friends. Right. And that's not really available today. But I think that's like a subtle trend that is starting to become more common.
Becoming more common. I know, I have multiples, and it's the same thing. They're kind of ways to silo off hobbies and friends and interests without having to get everything else.
Yeah.
And I do agree that it's becoming more common, because I've noticed a few times that I'll have friends follow across several of these accounts and be like, oh, okay. Or I'll see some account that is like, that reminds me of Bob. And I'll go and look, and it's like, it's because it is Bob. It's just an account I have never seen before and didn't realize we shared this interest. But it's interesting that is becoming a trend, because it speaks very much to your point of ultimately people understand, look, there's a trade-off between how much I give and how much I get with these social networks, right? It's like they're taking something from me, and I have control much more now. And I feel that will continue. But I still want these things and these interactions, and I still feel, I don't want to say need, a desire to go and experience those things and find that information. I would say, let's talk 5 years out.
Sure.
How do these trends that we see today, how do they resolve in 5 years? What are we going to see in 5 years, both in terms of what Direqt is doing and just generally the acceptance of that kind of data collection and comfort levels and sharing even more, like you said, personal interactions. I mean, dating sites to help curate who you're presented with as options. That sounds a little creepy and freaky to me, but
I have seen data that like 20% of 18 to 34-year-old men have used ChatGPT to help them write messages to people they've matched with on dating apps. So I would assume that the dating sphere will be very AI enhanced or supported in one way or another. It's not my realm, so I don't know too much there. If I were to take a 5-year stab, which is dangerous, especially in a world where things change so quickly, it's really hard to predict. But some of the things,
hold you to it.
I appreciate it. A few of the things that seem likely to me, one is fragmentation of discovery of content and information. So going back to social, like today, Meta has their own chatbot, Meta AI. It's available as a search bar that's integrated in WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook. You can also tag it in group chats. So if me, you, and two of our buddies have a private group chat where we DM each other every day, instead of having to leave that group chat, close Instagram, scroll to Safari or Chrome, open it, tap onto the browser tab, search for something, get a result, click on it, whatever. In the group chat, we can just be like, at Meta AI, what time is the game tonight? At Meta AI, are there more doors or wheels in the world? Which is a dumb debate that my friends and I like to have. You can search from anywhere, as language models have really commoditized the ability to do a good job at search. And now there's these sort of ways to tap into existing search engines by way of API. And so I think where people discover content will continue to be fragmented across existing search engines, new AIs and chatbots that exist everywhere that you spend time, voice assistants, which I think is another big trend. Like I do think the second wave of Alexa and Assistant and Siri is going to be much more meaningful because the actual user experience is better. As that relates to personalization, whether it's the phone or an in-home device, like a little Alexa speaker that you put on your counter. I do think some people will decide to have that quote unquote always listening so that it's always learning and getting better and better. I don't know if everyone will do that. I don't think I would do that necessarily. But I do think the prevalence of these AIs that you can talk to and interact with will only continue to flourish, and the mediums in which that you're engaging in are going to evolve from text to voice to text and voice to video. It seems likely to me that someone will crack the code on sort of AR or VR. Certainly AR feels more practical. I've been wearing these Meta AI Ray-Bans the past few
I have
weeks.
those. I was
Do you?
just going to talk to that. Yep.
So I've been using them to get a feel for like, how is it? How are people using it? I've been really impressed. I think the thing they got right was they used Ray-Ban. So the form factor is cool sunglasses that you would already wear. The microphone's amazing. The camera quality is very good. The speakers are awesome. Having the AI assistant's pretty cool. I think we're probably still pretty far from that being some like mainstream behavior. There's a lot to learn. They're going to put a heads-up display in the glass, which could change a lot. They're going to associate it with a wristband. So things are going to get crazy. And then if that happens though, and the default screen, some share of it moves from even 1% or 10%, or let alone 50, moves away from the phone, I think that would disrupt a lot in terms of the content business, brands in general, and advertising and marketing. What are your thoughts on the glasses? Have you liked them? Are you using them?
I use them pretty actively. Sound quality is amazing. One of the very first things I noticed about them was that if you record a conversation, the audio is spatial. So if someone moves across your field of view in the playback through the speakers, they move across, the soundscape moves. So I thought that was really interesting. I had a conversation with friends and they were in the proper spatial positions when I listened to it back. Like you said, the video quality is great. The Meta AI, I think they're still kind of working on it a little bit. And I agree with you. The next level has to include some sort of either AR or video display in the glasses themselves, because I think at that point, in a way, we go backwards a little bit. We go back to Google Glass, right? But I think that turns the AI into something incredibly powerful for a number of reasons. Number one, from a user standpoint, when I say, hey, Meta, what am I looking at? And it takes that photo, it tells me what's there. And it's usually pretty accurate, but it's very vague and in general terms. But I think if I say, hey, Meta, what am I looking at? And I don't hear that camera click and it comes back and it puts up a matching image and says, this is everything we know about this plant or this animal or the building you're looking at and who designed it. Suddenly this becomes a very valuable tool. And I think at that point, it also opens up opportunities for you guys to say, while you're here, this store, this brand, this whatever that you're about to go into is offering 25% off to, Ray-Ban Meta wearers or users.
The marketing around deep engagement with a voice interface, let alone one that supports some type of visual display, I think is going to be profound. I don't know what exactly and when that'll shake out, but I do think, to the point you're making, getting a piece of hardware that normal people will wear, like no one was going to wear Google Glass, like with all due respect, the people who worked on it, like it just
way
didn't
too
look
Star
cool.
Trek. Yeah,
100. But like normal people will wear. Most people don't notice I'm wearing them. They think I'm wearing Ray-Bans, and I tell them, and they're like, "What do you mean?" I click it, and the light goes off, and they're like, "Oh my gosh!" That's like, I think it's a 50% of the equations. Like, will people wear this thing? And maybe over time, again, you figure out contact lenses or some form factor that doesn't have to be so visual. But even if it's just talking to Siri on your phone or using the Alexa or Siri hardware in your house, interacting via voice will get easier and better and more useful. And I think that'll be a meaningful way that people shop. I think it'll be a meaningful way people get information and news in particular. And so I think over the 5 years, like those are the things to look out for. It's just more distribution points, more places to touch the user. And then for businesses and brands, it's like, if most 13 to 18-year-olds have an AI assistant, whether it's ChatGPT or somebody else that they talk to every day, how do I make sure my brand is the thing that gets recommended? Right? If someone's talking to a Vogue or an ESPN and they're looking for fashion or for sports advice or equipment, how do I make sure my brand is the thing that gets recommended? And I think you'll have this AI optimization effort the way we have search engine optimization today.
No, I agree with you. And the Ray-Ban angle is really interesting because it is a brand that kind of epitomizes cool, especially, the classic Wayfarer design. So you have that level of, like you said, nobody knows I'm wearing them when I wear them, what they are. They just, oh yeah, Rick always wears Wayfarers. That's just his thing. But they don't know what's in there. And I think their price point was kind of brilliant too. What's a pair of Wayfarers? A couple $100, and
Ballpark, yeah.
the glasses are $299. So it's not a leap. It's like, oh, this is kind of cool stuff, and it's really not that much more than the standard pricing. So, but what I find interesting about the potential, some of it's actually there already in other ways. You were talking about moving off the phone. If you think of something like Yelp, how many times, if you have your notifications turned on, Yelp will ping you and say, hey, we see you're next to this barbecue place. They're going to give you $5 off if you check in with them right now and go grab a sandwich. So I see, again, that sort of augmented reality more than VR being the future in a kind of sunglasses or regular glasses kind of standpoint. And being
sense.
able to learn about you. Again, it's that tracking concern. It knows where you are, it knows what you're doing, it knows all of your habits. But I also agree with you that I think we accept that internally more than we verbalize it. We like to complain about it. But nobody's quitting TikTok, right?
Devil's in the details. I don't
Right.
care if somebody knows that I like tacos. Like, what are you going to do with that information? Show me ads for tacos? No problem. I think there's other pieces of data that are more sensitive, and that'll have to get worked out for the people who care.
Sure.
But on the whole, I think all these products are getting better. I think it's the best time to be a consumer. I think life is getting easier. I think friction's getting removed. I think all of that is always a good thing. It's amazing we can click a button and food shows up at our door, or a car shows up to pick us up. It'll be really cool when we can just say that out loud for situations where we don't want to take our phone out. And all that's really exciting to build into.
So now that we've had the amazing discussion of all the wonderful things that AI and chatbots and giving up our data will do for us, I think there's an even larger concern industry-wide, speaking about the advertising industry and tech in general. What about jobs? As we move to this, AI can do more, automation does more. It's kind of the industrial revolution again, right? I don't need 1,000 people working a loom if I have mechanized industrialization, all those jobs go away. What is the future in terms of jobs, and what skills should people be looking at so that in 5 years they don't become redundant because the AI is just better, faster?
I don't know where things will go with overall employment. And I think the reasons people are concerned about that seem very, very valid. It's really hard to imagine paying somebody to do customer service as often as you might today, or data entry, or some of these really manual, just sort of brute force tasks that are highly repetitive that can be automated in a much better way. So it seems almost definite that some types of jobs will see a significant reduction. I do think there will be other jobs that'll be created as a byproduct of it. The optimist in me thinks about how when the camera came out, painters said that it was going to ruin painting because you could take pictures. Nobody's ever going to paint or look at paintings or anything like that. And in hindsight, that's kind of silly. And so I hope that it's a net positive. What I would probably lean on is critical thinking and strategy and judgment. Like in a world where the means of production are commoditized, where it's so much easier to produce an ad, as an example, the most valuable skill is going to be knowing, well, is that ad going to resonate? Is that culturally relevant? Does it have the right tone? Does it meet the moment? Is it too late? Did the trend we're talking about pass? And so the ability to then, if you have a world where instead of creating one commercial, you can create 10,000, the next level of skill that's going to be required is, well, how do I decide which of this to use? Now, one way to think about it is I'm going to throw all this into these scale platforms like Meta and get some data back. But there's always going to be room in businesses for strategic thinking and really good judgment on what these AIs or AI assisted tools are producing from an output perspective. I don't know that that's something that's necessarily taught in school. I think it's almost the opposite of the way the school system might be designed. But that is probably, in my opinion, on the safer side. Whereas if you're working in a role where every day you do the exact same thing and it doesn't change, that as a pattern seems much more susceptible to being automated away. And I think it's reasonable to be quite concerned about that. On the whole, I don't know what we will do to try to manage that transition. It seems like it could be challenging. I think I'd also say I would have expected this to have happened a little more quickly already. So Klarna has said they've been able to reduce maybe 70% of their call volume through AI for their call center for customer service. That would lead to a massive reduction in headcount for them.
Sure.
I haven't seen a second company with the same case study yet. And granted, that came out 6 months ago. But things take time. Businesses and people have inertia. And so hopefully there's a way for those people who might be affected to skill up, reskill, and transition into a different role. And I think using the tools is the best thing you can do. Like if you're not sure, I think being a practitioner who's, even if it's just ChatGPT, using that daily to understand what it's good at, where it's not, I think that helps you get a feel for, okay, when is this going to be something that maybe replaces one part or all of what I do on a day-to-day basis? And then where is this maybe going to create opportunities to do new things that weren't possible before?
I agree. I think there's an initial, change is scary, right? So a lot of the fear comes from knowing that change is coming. But I also think there's very often an initial sense that this changes everything. And in reality, it'll change many things. But some things are still going to be as they are. The needs are still going to be as they are. And I agree, strategy becomes more important. Critical thinking becomes more important. Training the AI properly and make sure it's responding properly. So now you've got an interesting new way for like a QA team to be employed rather than the traditional, I'm hunting bugs in a game or a piece of software. Now I'm hunting errors in the AI, right? And how it's responding and interacting. So I would agree. It's really, the magic 8 ball is a little fuzzy, but I don't think it's as catastrophic as a lot of people are really seriously concerned about right now. Like all things, everybody adapts. We find new ways to work with things. Some things will go away. Typesetters are kind of a thing of the past, but it doesn't mean that they didn't move forward into desktop publishing, right? It's
right.
Retraining the skills, not eliminating them wholly. Nick, this has been a great conversation. I could do this for another full hour. Really interesting stuff coming. I am now utterly obsessed with the idea of figuring out whether there are more doors or wheels in the world. It's been kind of cranking in my brain since you said it. So I'll be using some AI searches later. Thank you so much. I just have a last question. What do you see for Direqt in the next year?
Yeah, more of the same, which is helping the most important content publishers in the world meet their audience where they are and deliver a more engaging and personalized experience through AI. I think the more success we have on that front, it begets success. And so over the next 12 months, we're pretty laser focused on, we've got something that's moving the needle, that's driving a positive impact for companies that we think are really important. And it's just about scaling it up and supporting more customers and deploying more AIs and distributing them more broadly across more platforms and channels and really building up the monetization. And so that's probably the next 12 months for us.
Awesome. Sounds great. Again, thank you so much for being part of this. To everyone who is watching or listening, thank you for spending your time listening to this. I hope you learned something. We'll make sure to drop Direqt's information, links, and contact info into the show descriptions. And we hope to see you and hear from you on the next episode next month. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for listening.